Hello, sorry.
It's okay. Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Elizabeth Draper, Deputy Chair of the English Association, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this session today. The EA is a learned society and subject association which was founded in 1906 to promote, support and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education from primary and early years through to secondary and further education to higher education and beyond. We also cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers. So thank you to our speakers, Marco Benini and Ben Alderson-Day, who are here today with us. Our members make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. If you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please consider joining us. It costs around £1 per week to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you'll get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to Jenny Richards, who's our chair of the English Association, as well as the chair of this session, and also our speakers for our discussion, Thinking Forwards, Collaboration, Imagination and Cognition, Narratology Meets Psychology. Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody. So my name is Jenny Richards, and as Elizabeth said, I am the chair of the English Association. The Thinking Forward series, this is the last one in the series for this year. We hope to be running more next year. The Thinking Forward series is set up to help us understand interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work between English studies and other disciplines, especially with, let's say, distant cousins in the sciences. It's really important that we understand how we can work, how we can collaborate with other disciplines, and what the value of working with English studies is. It's part of the advocacy work we are doing. And I can tell you that later this summer, Professor Linda Pratt from Nottingham University will be helping create a toolkit about collaboration for colleagues in English and other disciplines. But it gives me my great pleasure to introduce our two guest speakers today, Marco Bernini, who is an Associate Professor of Cognitive Literary Studies in English Studies at Durham University, and he leads the Narrative and Cognition Lab. And our second speaker in conversation with him is also at Durham University, Ben Alderson-Day. He's Professor of Psychology and co-director of the Discovery Research Platform in Medical Humanities. I'm going to hand over to them in a moment. We're very much looking forward to finding out about their project, Threshold World Project, and other things that they've been doing. They've got a long track record at Durham University of managing and developing cross-disciplinary collaborations. So I hope we will have a really wide-ranging discussion. But they're going to talk about their project for about 10 minutes. And then I've got a few questions that I would like to ask them about their collaboration. And then we will open up to questions from our audience. We will end sharply at 2 o'clock. So thank you very much. And Marco, I'm handing over to you now.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jennifer, for inviting us, and Elizabeth for hosting with the tech today. So I'm going to share the screen. We have a little PowerPoint for you. Here it goes. So, oh, sorry, this is actually the end. So spoiler alert. And here we are. So time passes. We didn't plan it to work probably for more than a decade, I have to say, with me and Ben. So today we're going to talk about a specific project, but just to give you like a rough timelines and a topical timelines of how many so far topics we managed to work together. We started and met in 2012 in a project called Hearing the Voice. We might be talking more about it later. And that project was on voices and voices that are perceived in the absence of a speaker. And then we, as part of the project, we started to do some work on reading, and we published this study with the Edinburgh Book Festival's readers in 2017. And from reading, I asked Ben to join me in a project on dreaming. We put together a proposal. everything we have done more or less is intended to be also a contribution to consciousness studies, to the understanding of the human mind. So at that time I thought a good time to start to work on dreaming. Ben joined me and we put together an application, and that's the project we're going to talk about today, that we closed, and we are about wrapping up now with the final, but it started in 2020. And then the most recent collaboration we are happy eventually to expand on is a project led by Ben on reading called the Reader Bank, and where I'm a co-collaborator. So that's more or less the topical timeline, and it's more, as I said, more than a decade. So today we're going to zoom in the project on dreaming, which was called Threshold Worlds. Subtitle was Narrative, Dreams, Narrative, and Liminal Cognition. The project was funded by the Institute of Advanced Studies, major project scheme in collaboration. Then additional funding came from the Institute of Medical Humanities to join, to have more possibilities, because the project started during COVID and for 3 months, and then ended up lasting more, almost 6-7 months. The project, broadly intended, going to the specificity of the project, as I said, with Ben, we tend to work on the human mind and human consciousness, which is already pretty much an interdisciplinary object of investigation. But when it comes to dream, the problems of consciousness are doubled, because in dreams we need to understand the experience of dreaming when we are in the dream, so dreams as experiences, and then we also need to understand what happens when we go out of the dream, and we try to report what happened in dream reports and dream representations. So this in and out from the dreaming to the dream reporting and everything that goes on in between was pretty much the object of our investigation. And we had to pick. The complexity of the topic is wide and wild. So we had the first interdisciplinary moment we had was to find out how many clusters we wanted to organize the projects around, and we went for 4 clusters that I'm going to briefly illustrate now. The first was called narrativity. I'm a narrative theorist by training, cognitive narratologist since at least 2011, and so narrativity is very much a concept that is a key concept in narratology. With Ben, we discussed how to implement that concept, a problem in dreaming interdisciplinarily, and mainly with dreaming, the question is, are dreams narrative, or do we narrativize dreams when we wake up? So that's what the cluster we call narrativity. Then the second cluster is what we call permeability, which just in a half playful way can be linked to the idea what goes in the dreams from your waking life, and vice versa, what goes out of the dreams when you wake up. So this idea that nothing is really new, but only transformed by dreams from your waking consciousness, linked to the famous say popularized by Lucretius, that nothing is created, nothing's come from nothing, or the French chemist Lavoisier, nothing is made, nothing is destroyed, everything is transformed. So the stuff of dreams is coming from somewhere else and is recodified, recombined, or if you prefer a more like recent formulation by Justin Timberlake, what goes around comes around. So that was the cluster on permeability. Then we have the third cluster was immersivity, the idea that dreams are an elsewhere, and they are this elsewhere is often described as worlds. So this is the problem of dreams as worlds, and the idea that we go somewhere else, and we do that by going somehow elsewhere. So we were interested about the how of dreams as worlds, and this is what we call immersivity, which is another key concept in narrative theory and theories of immersions. And then the last problem was about reportability, the fact that dreams are very social, very excitingly vivid experiences, but you are alone in dreaming, at least you are alone waking up, and you want to, how do you bring someone else in the experience, in how it felt to you, that dream world. So that was the problem we call reportability. And these were the 4 clusters with a central target of investigating dreaming and dream report and dream representations in the art. So Then the second step was building the team. So we and which discipline? So with which discipline represented? Narrative theory was the obvious choice because I was a narrative theorist, but we also invited a pivotal leading narrative theorist in terms of narratology of dreams, Rachel Walsh, who accepted, and then Ben from psychology. Then we invited also a psychiatrist from work on hallucinations and dreaming, Armando D'Agostino, and then Sowen Park, director of the Literature and the Mind Center in Santa Barbara, joined us, and we were incredibly persuaded of the importance of also a creative component to the project. So we invited Lucy Treacher, who is the founder of the International Archive of Dreams, but also, and crucially, a visual artist and incredible music composer. So this was a team, and then the structure of the project. Step 3, what are we going to do once we have the team and the clusters? We opted for weekly team meetings and 6 talks by each of us in the team. So every week there was something going on, and on the top of that, we invited guest speakers, 5 of them in the term, 3 months of the core part of the project. At the end of the 3 months in December, we had an international workshops with an open call and very great proposals. And we also, from the very beginning, we scouted for international affiliates, and we managed to have more than 25 from a variety, as you can see, of disciplines. And I'm not going to read, but there were many, and all proved necessary. I should also say that it's not visualized here, but also Adam Powell was a core team, became a core team member, and he's from religion studies, and he ended up like creating a contribution to the book that Ben will be talking about. And then we also crucially wanted something for people to constantly contribute to, and so we actually created we invested quite a lot of energies and efforts in the blog, which is still available for you to scout and peruse. And Adam Powell from Religion Studies in Durham was responsible to curate the blog. And the blog was made of allow the possibility for every one of us to write short pieces about ideas, how to investigate dreams interdisciplinarily, and it's still lively and there, lively and there. And then we had from Lucy, together with Lucy, created a lot of songs throughout the project to try to understand how to render dream experiences and dream phenomenology via music. And by the end of it, the conclusion of this contribution by Lucy is still a playable click-and-play video games that she created called the Sleep Circus, which is a multimodal arcade navigation of spaces and visuals as intended to be prompters for dream phenomenology. And we also, still more or less in the 3 months, we managed to throw out some ideas on how to extend this to a grant application, which we made and applied to the Apex scheme. We were, I have to say, very happy to discover we got shortlisted. We didn't make it to the end, but it was already like really great to get shortlisted, to get great feedback, and so we were grateful. The Permeable Mind is now become like my own individual book project, but the process, even that process of writing a grant with Ben was, I think, a way to for many things in the Dream project to coalesce into being the grant was unsuccessful. What it was successful is very much what has become probably the major contribution we made to Dream Science, which is the Dream Survey, on which Ben is going to be talking about now.
Thank you, Marco. So we were very keen to produce something as a team as part of Threshold Worlds. And so we designed a dream survey of our own. There are plenty of dream surveys out there in research, but very rarely done by interdisciplinary teams. And what we did is we posed the challenge to our group: can you design something which gathers new empirical data about dreams that wouldn't otherwise be collected? So you can see some of the examples of the questions from our survey. It was much longer than that, than you can see here. But in a way, it's quite a flexible tool and format to both pose questions that all of us are interested in, and questions which are very specific to different disciplinary concerns and specific debates within our own fields. Also allowed us to vary up the format of the kind of questioning. So these weren't all yes, no's, they weren't all kind of kind of very open-ended dream reports. We collected a mixture of the two. We also include some standardized scales from cognitive science and psychology, which allows us to explore facets like lucid dreaming control and absorption, either in kind of fictional, real, or dreamlike worlds as well. So over 300 people took part in this survey through the course of 2021, and it generated a very rich data set that we then plan to analyze as a team. Following doing that survey, if you could move on the slide, Marco. We also pitched a proposal to OUP to collect our findings and indeed the kind of ongoing research from our wider network of people involved in Threshold Worlds into an edited collection, Dreams, Narrative and Liminal Cognition. I believe that was finally approved in around about 2022. So then we put out a call for papers within our network, and we had our core team all produce chapters of their own. It's been something, to be honest, that we're fitting in alongside other work. So it's only now coming to full fruition. It'll be due in 2026. This is a breakdown of the contents of that book and the key chapters from a wide range of disciplines, as Marco outlines. And the key thing this allowed us to do was pick out individual results and findings from the survey that could answer specific concerns from our disciplines too. So I wrote on the topics of lucid dreaming and hypnagogia, so kind of unusual hallucinatory experiences around the boundaries of sleep. Richard Walsh wrote on narrativity and whether dreams should be considered kind of acts of narrative in themselves. I believe that ultimately he concludes that you can make that case based on the data from the survey. Adam Powell wrote on how kind of religiosity and religious experience then shapes dream interpretation, almost enhances their vividness for some people. And John Sutter, a philosopher of mind at Stirling, who's just set up a really large interdisciplinary centre for memory studies, actually took part in the survey and then wrote about his own experiences in his chapter to engage in a really interesting two cultures debate about how he approached dream research as a whole. So a really vivid collection of things there, and we hope that it's going to generate a lot of questions and ideas for people when it comes out too. Back to you, Marco.
And that's what was the project. Where are we today? And again, we might have a chance to, but the story continues into different, although interconnected ways. So I'm currently, we both are funded at the moment, me and Ben, by a new grant, large grant, Wellcome Trust grant, called the Discovery Research Platform in Medical Humanity. And the project is funding, the platform is hosting a lot of labs and sites. You can find out more about the platform by yourself online, but we are individually responsible for two different entities. I funded and I lead the Narrative and Cognition Lab, where very much like I've done individually in the past, that's my main job in my career, unifying narrative theory and cognitive sciences for an interdisciplinary investigation of the mind. So in the lab now, I'm bringing together narrative theorists, cognitive scientists, and creative people across media and experiences to exchange and innovate methodologically this study of the mind. Ben is leading what is called the Reader Bank, which has a beautiful website created by our postdoc Georgia Panton in the project, the site, as we call it, Reader Bank, on which I'm a co-player. But Ben is leading the development of this Reader Bank that has the potential to become one of the largest and more interdisciplinary, direct interdisciplinary archive on reading and imagination. We started in collaboration with the Edinburgh Book Festival, but now it is taking up a life of its own, and Ben will be certainly happy to expand more on the Reader Bank in the Q&A. I think that's all for us. Thank you for having us, and we're going to mute ourselves till the next question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. I really do admire this project and the work that colleagues at Durham do in this cross-disciplinary space. And Ben, we will definitely want to hear a bit more about Reader Bank, and I'm sure there'll be questions about that. But I have a couple of other questions before we get to that. I suppose you did tell us quite a bit about how the collaboration for this project has worked. I mean, your weekly meetings. I think it'd be interesting to know why you chose to do weekly meetings, and also obviously this is hugely inclusive of many different disciplines. But I'd like to ask a very practical question about, or I'd like to invite you to tell us about the highs and lows of collaborations? What's difficult? What works? What have you found makes a deeply cross-disciplinary collaboration actually work well?
I'm happy to take this, but Ben will have more to add, because I can even I think just at Ben's painful side of things, but I might be just guessing and see if we can converge. But I think the point is that the simplest way to say it, I think, is that my own field, cognitive narrative theory, is there even without direct collaboration with psychologists. You can write about the mind in a narrative just using data collected or models from the sciences that have been published in articles and stuff. So the question is, why do you need to involve direct collaboration with the psychologist or a cognitive scientist or a neuroscientist, and why sometimes even to spend time and money in very costly fMRI studies or even just a qualitative survey that are taking a long time. So similarly from Ben, psychology fiction is a field, but most of the psychologists that are doing that field are not really like co-designing or conceiving hypotheses in conjunctions with people from the humanities. They just take fiction and or movies as a text, as a target phenomenon, and then they do their research by themselves. So it is possible, that's my point, to do it independently. So why yes. What is the laws of doing it conjointly are equally exciting as the highs, because it's a discovery process. You don't know what the lows will be till you get there, I would say. But also it's a complicating and complexifying first step, and you don't know if by the end of it you'll know more. You know that there will be more work to be done, and not necessarily you don't have any guarantee that they would be producing more like neat models. The lows, but the eyes is that if they go right, even the lows will be counted as data, results, or process information that are valuable, because even when models are clashing or practices are colliding, I think there is a lot to be taken in. The lows for me, or for us, I guess, theories of narrative is that sometimes you want to test, you want to investigate things that are, from a psychology perspective, very hard to create a design that is able to investigate that complexity. So you have to sacrifice, compromise. These are the keywords that are usually sometimes describing how people in the humanities or even narrative theory feel. To me, the process of having to simplify or constrain the theoretical ideas to fit a design, we don't always have to go experimental, but that maneuver of simplifying is very something I ended up enjoying now. But the beginning was painful.
Thank you. Ben, what about you?
Well, I think part of your question answered some of the other questions along the way. So yes. We made a deliberate decision to meet very regularly, because what we found from our past projects that if you can do co-location, even better, but having some sort of kind of constant connection among your team, where you have space to share ideas, but also really kind of properly learn and ground yourself in other people's disciplines. That's yes. really key. Sometimes people try and do this stuff almost too fast, and they can end up talking past each other, or you end up just having kind of a very kind of conceptual engagement. Whereas if you can educate others, not just in ideas and theories, but in each other's methods, yes. Then that gets you to the point where you can start making new knowledge together. You can design new projects, whether they're empirical or theoretical, and things can start to converge. I mean, on the topic of kind of highs and lows, I think the fact that Marco and I are still working together probably suggests that there haven't been that many lows. But I would call them challenges. There are challenges always of, like, co-writing can be a challenge. We write in different ways because of our discipline, because of our own, our own ways in which we write. I would say in general, psychologists are bad at writing, and if anything, it's encouraged. And most of my English colleagues are fantastic writers. But if we're saying, well, for this sort of study, we need to pitch it to this psychology journal, I have to continuously edit Marco's brilliant writing down to something which is quite simplistic and very, very kind of spare. So those sorts of things are things that you learn along the way that are kind of further means of alignment, and can feel difficult at times, but if you persist, you will get there.
I wanted to pick up on this. I really like this idea about, and I agree with it, actually you need time in a project that's cross-disciplinary. You need to find space for people to think together. And there's a longer and deeper getting to know you that's needed when you're working with other disciplines. And I wanted to link this to, so you applied and got shortlisted for Apex funding, is that right? And but it's very hard to get funding for cross-disciplinary projects. I think Durham have been remarkably successful at that. And I'm just wondering if there's something that's a kind of message we need to get across to funders.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, Marco. So I think that these things go through waves, but more often than not, you get different stages of funders expressing an interest in interdisciplinarity. Sometimes they're not very ambitious in that. So what they mean is a mathematician talks to an engineer, and I'd say that doesn't really count. But the more interesting ones are really kind of cross-faculty, across, arts, humanities, social science, and science. And they tend to be the more ambitious. But the challenge we face when we're, say, pitching to Royal Society or someone like that is really showing that the collaboration is feasible and is going to lead to kind of tractable outcomes. And often what isn't really emphasized is that people are looking for some sort of track record of teams working together. So I'd really encourage people to look for small internal funds, or using things like the British Academy scheme, their own small grant scheme, of co-organizing a workshop, working together on a position piece, getting those foothills, which shows you can work together as a team, and it's not the first time you're in a room together going, oh, we mean different things by representation or identity. So funders, like with other grants, funders are looking for track record, and it can be hard to know where to start with interdisciplinary working. But there are things out there, and I know for Apex or for other things, it was the fact that we had shown that we worked together before, which then opened up other opportunities.
Thank you very much. Marco spoke very eloquently about touched on the value of collaborating, the kind of the way, for me, and the way I would think of it, is kind of stretching your thinking. But I wonder if I could turn that into more specific questions, especially for you, Ben, about working with humanities people, especially with people from English studies. And this might be, you might want to turn to read about, but I'd like to know a little bit more about what you value about working with us. What you get out of it.
Well, one thing to say is that Marco is an incredible interdisciplinarian in himself. Marco has often read more cognitive science and contemporary philosophy of mind than I've had a chance to read, and I'm learning from him. So he really occupies a conceptual space, which is very easy for me to go and access, and that kind of then the kind of those issues of almost like translation don't happen so much, because actually he's so well connected with that field, and cognitive literary studies as a whole is really good at doing that. So that helps, kind of that enlivens my thinking, or makes me challenge certain assumptions, because often he's coming, even though he's read that stuff, he's coming from a different perspective. Via Hearing the Voice and ongoing work at the IMH, I've worked with a range of scholars coming from English and literary studies. And often there is more of a challenge, or a gap between how do we take some of their conceptual concerns, theoretical interests, and how do we turn them, say, into empirical ideas that we can test. That can be a challenge. Sometimes it's more of it goes back to that kind of educational issue of almost learning what concepts can be tested, and how often scientific methods aren't all that flexible in how we integrate different ideas into them, but it is possible. That I think in general, to go more generally, my experience with English studies as a whole has been really to appreciate the variety of theoretical thinking. I often think of English studies as a kind of real magpie discipline, because actually you need to be across so much in philosophy, in psychology, in kind of cultural theory. It's a really brilliant way of developing generalist thinkers in a way that sometimes I think people outside the discipline don't really recognize or appreciate. So it means it's always a very rich interaction, even if sometimes you're hitting cul-de-sacs in terms of translation into certain types of empirical work.
Thank you. One of the things we've learned from this series is that sometimes it's really good, and this is a way of thinking for literary studies, to be involved early on in the experiments, the design of experiments. And I really struck by what you said just there. I wonder, before I hand over to the audience and invite them to ask their questions, I wonder, Ben, if there's something, if you would like to tell us a little bit about Reader Bank, because that might, I think anybody involved in the English Association, our ears will have pricked up. It sounds, if you tell us a little bit about it, great.
Well, I mean, so this is very much something that Marco is part of and key to as well. It's I like to sometimes think of it as the empirical wing of his narrative and cognition lab, but it's essentially it's so. Science festivals, for example, are very established places where sometimes what you do is you go and see talks, then in between talks you go and take part in experiments, you can contribute to research. And we've had an ongoing collaboration with Edinburgh Book Festival for a number of years at Durham. But one of the things that we were keen to do with them is think about, well, what could you do in an innovative way which turns literary festivals into sites of research? Like, what would it look like if you had a research lab kind of on site that then people took part in studies of imagination and reading? And that Reader Bank grew out of that almost as an analogy to a project called Biobank, which is a national health-based project that people can take part in year on year to contribute to understanding of kind of brain and body. And we thought, well, what if you were to do that for the imagination? What if people were to be continuously contributing to new studies around reading, the imagination, its links to health and well-being, what it tells us about things like consciousness? So we're now in our third year of that project. What we do is we launch new studies each year in August at Edinburgh, and then we have various side projects going off. And the conceptual core of the kind of things that we pose comes from Marco's work and Marco's field, essentially. So to give one example, last year we had a survey on the power of immersion that was introduced by Marco, including with a video of him literally in the sea in Italy, explaining the concept of narrative immersion, and really trying to explore, when we talk about either whether being transported or immersed in fictional worlds, is this the right metaphor? Is this the right mechanism? Is it working for the same people in the same way? And then psychologically and neuroscientifically, what's the basis of that? How do we come to understand how that works in the mind? So we ran some really interesting work on that last year. We're linking it into things like if you have a particularly vivid visual imagination versus being engaged in, say, the voice and language of a text, or how people are feeling during a story. Are any one of those poles more linked to a kind of very immersive experience? A lot of people would assume it's visual, but it's slightly more complicated than that. So yeah, Reader Bank is something everybody could take part in. It's kind of iterating along as it goes. And it really is about translating core theoretical ideas from cognitive literary studies into something which can be studied in a kind of large scale empirical way.
Thank you very much. Marco, would you like to add anything to tell us from your perspective?
Well, I second everything Ben said. He's been very generous with me, and I want to be generous back, because in a way, Ben is a very well-read psychologist, so he reads a lot of novels, and that helps in terms of, like, he knows very well the experience of reading by firsthand, and that's not always the case. And he's generally interested in the experience of reading from an aesthetic perspective, which again is not, even before he became like interested in psychology of fiction, I think that was the case, and that really helps, because when we are talking about case studies, novels, characters, dimensions of reading, he has a lot from his own experience to bring to the table. Then linking the dream project with the Reader Bank, Ben is incredibly patient, and I think that's really something that you can, and he has very limited time now, because also part-time, because she has two beautiful daughters, and so that time is limited even more, and it takes a huge amount of time to transform. I bring in ideas, theories, my own combinations of models and tweaks that I would like to make, and he listens to the dream team, the team of the Dream World project, and it wasn't an easy thing. It was the one actually suggesting, let's try a survey. Then probably he regretted it a few times, because it was really, you had to imagine, like, you have to explain in the same virtual room. In that case, you have a musician, a theologian, two narrative theorists, and a literary theorist, and you have to explain them how a survey works, how to data, what kind of data we can collect, we cannot collect. So there are a lot of steps even before you start the implementation. And Ben is incredibly not only patient, but also good in explaining steps. Then when it comes to the Reader Bank, I think from my point of view, there is a lot of work, as you, Jennifer, might be aware of. There are society of empirical studies on reading, like the IGEL and others, and a lot of people are doing empirical research on reading in the world. I know few of them, few institutions, and I'm glad there is stellar research out there. What is hopefully new and is not secondarily tied to Ben himself as the lead on the project, because it's due to the fact of willing to be interdisciplinarily from the design onwards. It doesn't have to be a sort of retrofitting from the data, retrofitting the models or the idea, the hypothesis. And that's what I asked Ben. I'm interested in what I'm doing with Ben, because that's the way he's okay to work, and that's the only way in which I would give my time today, because I think that's the novelty we are bringing, is starting from that kind of idea. It has to be an holistic, from the get-go project, from the design to data and back, and I think that's what Ben is bringing, and that's why it's a pleasure to. It's an honestly, if you feel like there is novelty regardless of the results.
Thank you. I mean, that is such a great tribute to each other. And obviously, this is clearly a really successful and very respectful working relationship. The message that's coming across really strongly, Marco, is the idea that cross-disciplinary collaborations need to really begin at the beginning. So thank you for reminding us of that. And also the other thing that's coming off very strongly to me is that, well, I think this anyway, but it requires, I think, rather special people to do cross-disciplinary collaboration, the patience and the care and the willing to listen. So that's great. So thank you both very much. You've been marvelous, and this work, I think we will be following it with great interest. I'd like to open up to the colleagues on who are part of this webinar. We have one question in the chat. Erica, are you happy for me to ask your question, or would you like to be unmuted and ask it yourself? Yeah, all right, so I will. So Erica notes that Kazuo Ishiguro's novel, The Unconsoled, is an example of a narrative written like a dream. Although interpretation is subjective, she asks, are you able to assess how dreamlike a narrative is, or how well it represents a dream experience?
This is an excellent question, and it's not because we want to sell the book forthcoming, but there are a few people trying to answer these questions in the book, and I have my own view in the book. I know Ben will have something to say, but for me, although when I'm teaching my students, I have a module called Mind and Narrative. One seminar is on dreams, and I'm using Kafka's short story, The Bridge. It's a very short story, but is actually ambiguous. It's impossible to determine if it is a bridge, if it is a dream or not. It's about a man feeling like becoming a bridge or being a bridge. I think what we ended up discovering and confirming, because at least that was my idea, is that there is not a single element. It is not just about the content. It is not just about the form. It is not just about the perspective or lack or presence of elements, impossibilities versus possibilities. It's more about the combination that it needs to engender a specific. I'm calling in the chapter dreams immersivity, heightened narrowed immersivity, because in a way there are things there is more on the emotional level, on the vividness of some details, and then there is less in terms of periphery and information. The visual is very constrained. So the idea that, for me at least, it's a combination of something that is absent, like imagine if you are like lacking peripheral vision, and something that therefore also, because you don't have the contour or the periphery, what's in the front, it gets spiked, and regardless of I guess my view is regardless of the contents. Other people are more focusing on the bizarreness of dreams, for example. For me, it's more a matter of perception. So I don't know. I know Ishiguro. I don't know that novel, but I will definitely have a look. And thanks for the question, Ben.
Are you handing over to me? Okay. Well, just.
Oh no, sorry. I thought. Yeah.
I mean, just to offer something very briefly, last week I was at a workshop in Copenhagen on the sense of reality, on philosophy, psychology, psychiatry, thinking about what gives us a sense of reality and what happens when it breaks down. And one of the key conclusions there was that there's no one single thing which is determining our feel of reality. Lots of things can be quite unusual. And I would say when we think about what makes something dreamlike, we probably are talking about that composite where there's a range of different ways in which something feels like it's, you know, that it kind of gives us that dreamlike feel, some of which are the things that Marco has touched on. And I guess a motivation for something like Threshold Worlds is that there's a bit of a convergence happening in philosophy of science, philosophy of mind and cognitive science of dreams at the moment, which is proposing quite a pared back kind of simulation model of dreams, which is about a very minimal sense of self, a lack of embodiment, and almost a kind of lack of kind of color and cultural enrichment in how people are experiencing dreams. And if anything, the virtue of bringing in scholars from the arts and humanities to interrogate these models is to break that apart again and really highlight how much, you know, dreaming is still a creative act that draws upon cultural influences, cultural frames, narrative genres. And we lose something when we pare it back to a kind of very minimal definition of what it is to be dreamlike.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you, we can see that Erica has responded in the chat. We have another question. This is from Linda. Linda Pratt. Linda, do you want to unmute, or is it okay for me to ask your question? Oh yes, she's already answered that question. So Linda says, thank you for a fascinating presentation and Q&A. Could you please say a little more about new and or unexpected things you were learning from your collaboration on ReaderBank? What's surprising you?
We could talk about the reader types. They're quite interesting. So one of the things we set out for ReaderBank is that we need something kind of interesting to catch hold of people and think, you know, what are they getting back? And we devised a quiz that was essentially going to tell you what kind of reader type you are, a bit like, you know, those old magazine quizzes telling you what kind of personality you are or something. But the content that went into that quiz was essentially developed largely by Marco, along with John Foxwell, who was also did a PhD in literary theory, now a games designer. And essentially drawing upon concepts from our prior work about what it is to experience characters and narrators within a story. So this quiz, you get 6 different reader types that, for example, you might end up being the traveler. So when you read a book, you become the main character. You've got main character energy. Or you might be a spectator. You might be outside of it viewing a scene. Similarly, you might be more engaging in the kind of the auditoriness. You might be narrating a text, or you might be the listener. You're kind of in there in a conversation. And I guess we designed this thing thinking, well, we'll just see how it goes. And it's something really to illustrate kind of differences in how people engage in the story. The thing we didn't expect is actually we really were picking out something quite different. A lot of these categories were fairly evenly distributed in terms of how people took part in the quiz, and fairly stable for people too. So we couldn't have really predicted what kind of data we would have got. But if anything, we picked up on quite stable and I would say quite radical diversity in how people are engaging in a kind of imaginative reading response. I don't know if, Marco, you want to add anything to that. I want to emphasize though as well, that's not psychologists converting ideas from literary theory. It's literally 2 literary theorists building the scale in the first place.
Yes.
No, that's great, Ben. I have only one comment about the very way the question was phrased about what something you discover, and I think that's a really important part of not every time you do science you're hoping to be in this kind of discovery mode. Sometimes you want to confirm or replicate, or and with Ben, since 2017, when the study we published, there are a lot of we were, for example, back then looking for voices, and then we discovered much more. And even now, to be honest, we still have to look properly at the data we are collecting the past 2 years, and that's part of interdisciplinary. Like you run, and then you have this data, and it's not your everyday job to look at the data, and then you need to find the time. But that moment will be, I know already, will be exciting, because I've done that already with Ben. And just to, I think, speaks back to the question, although it's might be a little technical, but what will happen, that has already happened, is that then we will have this data, we will be like quantified data, but also a lot of free answer with people describing things in words. And we will have to go with Ben together through all of them, deciding what's technically, it's called coding, like what do we want to code for what is there in this data. And that's already like a process where you decide what do you see, basically, what are the filters you want to go. I'm speaking in a plain language, not too technical, but that's a moment that when happened in 2017 was a discovery process, because sometimes you thought you wanted to just write an article and look for voices, and then you discover that you're talking about, I don't know, movies and reading, or consciousness and visual imagery, and not just auditory imagery. But that's something you discover once you look at the data, and that there is a discovery element that usually is very common to humanities people, is much less common or even allowed by science, by some science and some scientists.
Thank you very much. I've noticed that Victoria Patton has put in the chat the link to the, just double checking, is it the survey? Let's have a look.
Yeah, so
Yes.
on ReaderBank, if you take it's called the Imagination Quiz, is the thing we were just mentioning on the ReaderBank website.
Yeah. I don't see any questions right now, but I have one final question, if I may. So there's very pioneering cross-disciplinary work happening in Durham. I've been waiting for a long time. People have been talking about the need to bring together cross-disciplinary teams to address all sorts of challenges, societal challenges, conceptual challenges. It's proved particularly difficult, quite hard to do, to bring together, especially science and humanities, although some people do manage it. And I just wonder if you've got any sort of final reflections on why that has proved difficult for universities, apart from Durham and a few others, to move into that space, and what we need to think about to help make it happen. And I'm thinking in particular of science humanities collaborations.
I have my final thought ready, because I think it's something I really will love more people from your audience, Jennifer, and yourself included, to come back at us about what this might mean for them. But I have an article, a chapter for coming in a companion for the Gruyter on literature and science, and there I'm pushing this concept of what I'm calling operational empathy, the idea that between disciplines we need to understand how the other discipline works properly. It's not enough to be fascinated by psychology. You need to understand what are the methods, what are the constraints, what they can or cannot do. Yes. And this is the only way to me to be gentle with each other, because sometimes there's also these both ways, really, because the humanities sometimes tend to overplay the victim's cards, if I may say. But there is equal misunderstanding sometimes, fueled by some form of mythology or narrative, really, about what a scientist, or stereotypes about what a scientist, what the narrative scholar, the humanities scholar is. The only way to go beyond this mythologizing, reciprocal misunderstanding or stereotyping, I think, is to understand really what is the job of the other. And we know in the humanities, that some scientists think that all people in English studies are doing the same thing. There are so many different approaches, periods, modes of doing it. So we know the complexity of our field. Less, though, sometimes we understand the complexity and the practical difficulties of the scientific mode of doing things. And I think, to me, that's the only way to go, to be honest.
I would say, I think I could emphasize 3 points. One, don't emphasize the importance of structures. We don't have, our universities generally are not structured to enable projects to have a legacy or to keep going. There might be bubbles when collaborations will come together, but then actually in terms of promotion, progression criteria, or how we manage our duties as academics, like we're always there's this magnetic pull back to the disciplinary space and away from the interdisciplinary. So it's very hard to maintain collaborations over time in the way that you need to be really productive. Secondly, topics, like often people there's an assumption almost that interdisciplinary discussion will be valuable. Some topics make that actually really, really hard, and it's really hard for things to get going, because ultimately maybe some of the overlap of convergence is a bit of a faux ami in terms of you think you're talking about the same thing, but ultimately you may not be, or different disciplines are fundamentally aiming at different things to do with that topic. So there's a certain alchemy about what topics really have the kind of the flexibility to give so that they can be shared objects of study across disciplines, genuinely something that it's enriching kind of for both sides, aiming at similar things. I would say on hearing the voice in particular, you know, it ran for 10 years. It was because a topic of voices, how we represent and understand them across, you know, clinical and non-clinical contexts, across societies and cultures. It's such a rich topic in of itself that it was continuously giving back to all of us. But lastly, to really emphasize Marco's point, teams are key, and the people who are in those teams who want to work together as a team. Some people are interdisciplinary because they're very well read and they read across disciplines, but they're terrible collaborators. They're confronted by the idea of talking to people from other disciplines because it might change, or they might have to adapt some of their precious ideas. And instead, you know, successful collaboration, at least in our experience, comes from people who are willing to be generous and empathetic in the way that Marco's describing, sit with uncertainty, ride the wave if we don't know where we're going with this, or wait till the end of the seminar before you realize, oh, that links in with my idea as well. Or even not. Sometimes you don't. You sit through a whole hour and don't know how it connects. So there's a big people factor here into how the teams are built. It's not for everybody. It doesn't have to be. But it's great fun if you are a person who's inspired in that way.
I think that's absolutely, that has been so helpful. I have learned so much from the two of you today. I really have. And I really appreciate the emphasis on the qualities of being interdisciplinary, the generosity, the openness to being surprised, all of this. But also your final point, Ben, we're not trying to turn everybody into interdisciplinary. We value disciplines as well, and we need those disciplines to thrive, etc. So that has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you both so much for coming today. Marco, do send me that essay you're talking about. I'd love to. Yes,
we'll be out this year anyway. But I will absolutely.
And I know that Linda Pratt on this webinar will be interested as well. I'll share that with her. But so I'm going to bring this to a close now and hand back to Elizabeth. And I just wanted to let everybody know, invite you to, and putting a link in the chat. This is to the English Association's annual conference. We'd be delighted to see people there. So if you want to find out a bit more about that, please just go into the chat. And you also will find in the chat the link to the Reader Bank survey as well. But you know, wonderful work that you're doing at Durham, and we look forward to meeting you again. I'm handing back to you now, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marco Bonini and Ben Alderson-Day, and also to Jenny for chairing an absolutely fascinating discussion. I will be turning off the recording now, but just before I do, to invite everyone also to go onto the English Association website and find out about other events that are happening in the future, of which there are many, especially along the Thinking Forward series. So thank you very much. I'll stop the recording now.